Our men, his story. Our transformation, his glory. This is Disciple. Welcome to the Brotherhood.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Disciple podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Deibler. At Disciple, we're equipping men of God to walk boldly in the light and truth of God's word so that they can lead lives of ministry and mission and honor the call of the Great Commission. Welcome, welcome, welcome indeed. This is such an exciting moment for me, guys, to see this platform come to fruition, knowing all that it took to get here. That's the thought that I had leading up to this recording was, how do I convey the message to the audience of God's work and the process that he, revealed to get us to this point? And I'm not just talking about, building this particular podcast, but bringing all of our men through radical transformations in faith to get us into fellowship with one another and give us the opportunity to glorify him with our testimonies and to serve in a discipleship community and extend, a hand outward to all different parts of the world, to people of all walks of life. I want to tell you today about my story. I'm going to walk you back and just kind of reveal to you my life before Christ and then my transformation and really the 12, 13-year journey to get to this point. I would have never thought that I would be leading a community of disciples. I mean, that was the absolute last thing on my radar. And just so you guys know, I'm not a guy that ever wanted to put himself on camera or behind a microphone. I mean, this is an only God deal, right? But before I get into my story, let me just kind of give you the overview of Disciple. Discipled is a Christian brotherhood. We are a community of men, and currently we're stretching across 4 different continents, countless time zones. We meet together virtually, and we walk together in study of the word, in confession, in prayer, and just really powerful fellowship, molding and sharpening each other for servant leadership inside of our homes, inside of our workplaces, and inside of our communities. Our mission is the Great Commission. So this podcast is an opportunity for us to highlight the men inside of the community and to give you a feel for, what we're all about and perhaps encourage you to get involved. This is our transformation, and it's all for his glory. It's his story. And that's what we want to reveal, his victory in our lives so that we can encourage you and inject you with hope because, we all came from dark places. And God showed up in ways that were undeniable, and he led us to just amazing growth and transformation that could only be possible through his hands. So let me start today with my story, because I think it's important, and a lot of you know my story. A lot of you know it to a certain extent. I had a bunch of people come into my network within the last year or so. So a lot of people know my story from the last year forward. Not everybody knows it all the way back, taking it back to childhood. Now, if you followed me for a long time, you've read my blog posts, perhaps you've read my book. It's all in there. And so if you want kind of greater depth to what I'm about to share here, you can read it in the book. But I'm excited here and it's been a while. It's weird because, you get so involved in kind of the next phase of your faith journey and you're always looking forward. And I rarely have the opportunity to sit and reflect on what got me here, which is something I should be doing on a routine basis because it gives you a great appreciation for all the work that God has done. I'm going to do that today. So to tell you a little bit about my backstory, I grew up in, a traditional Christian household. We went to church pretty regularly. Now I was baptized and kind of went through the traditional, like the traditional route of like the church upbringing, right? It was a traditional Lutheran church in a small town community. It was kind of, I hesitate to say like conservative in nature, but it like old school, I never felt a connection to that community whatsoever. I never knew God inside of that community. I never knew my way around the word. And I had no desire to be there. I actually remember as a kid hiding in the closet when Sunday morning would come around because I just did not want to go to church. And I would resist, I would kind of throw the temper tantrum and see if I could, get out of it. And at times, my father would just be like, okay, he'd throw up his hands and say, I can't, I'm not going to drag him in there screaming and kicking at me. I'll just leave him home. So there were times when I won that battle. But when I was there, it was very much kind of the tell you to stand up, sit down. Okay, read this, read that. Okay, we're going to sit and listen to a sermon now. But there was never anything that really tugged at me, that resonated inside of my heart. And so I was just checked out. I was more concerned with where we were going to lunch after. As a kid, I started in probably early adolescence dealing with some things. And up until that point, I was, pretty typical kid. I loved running around outside, had a bunch of friends, got involved with athletics. And so I was just kind of enjoying life. But when I got to early adolescence, I started to encounter some adversities that I really couldn't make sense of. And, I look at it as though the enemy was trying to plant seeds in me in that season of my life to really, steer me off course and derail me in such a way that I would have a hard time finding my way back to God. I started dealing with obsessive compulsive disorder and compulsive negative thoughts. And that obsessive compulsive wiring really was devastating to me because I felt a ton of shame. Like I knew that my behavior was odd and I knew that I didn't have a good explanation for it. So if someone were to catch me in like one of those habits, kind of wiping door handles or flipping the switches of the lights 10 or 15 times, counting, washing my hands, all of that stuff. Like if someone were to catch me doing it, I knew they would say like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? And I felt a lot of pressure then to conceal those behaviors. And I felt a lot of shame and guilt for the way that I was acting. And beyond that, I would often deal with these like really intrusive, like negative thoughts, and to describe it, it was like, thoughts of bad things happening, right? Somebody getting into some kind of violent accident or someone dying or something like that, or just bad thoughts about myself or, kind of like thoughts that were associated with me doing harm or doing wrong. And I didn't want any part of them. And so I started to feel like responsibility, obviously, for them. And I would pray in that season of my life. I would ask God, like, please take these away from me and forgive me because I don't want anything to do with them. Like they show up and I don't feel any control over them. It's not my desire to have these thoughts, but I'm owning it, and it's creating this like mound of stress and anxiety on me. And I'm concealing it the whole time because honestly, I'm pretty good at that. Like I've developed an identity at this point where, people see me as like the golden boy in a sense, like I'm good in school. I'm great at athletics. I got a big network of friends. Like everything is wonderful on the surface, everything in our family life looks good, but really inside of our home, there's a lot of unrest. And it's this kind of pattern that I start to fall into of hiding my true identity and running from this fear and trying my best to bury it, to keep up kind of the perception that all is well. So as I get into high school, I'm, kind of fast tracked from an athletics perspective. So at my high school, nobody played varsity football until they were in 10th grade. I had some success in junior high. And so the varsity football coach looked at me and said, "Hey, we would like to move you up to varsity. And we'd like to do that in your freshman year." So I was leaving all of the guys that I was close with in my class to go play on the varsity team. But it was a great honor to have been offered that. And it put me in a position where then, like my sophomore year, and I had the opportunity to learn from a guy who I really admired, who was ahead of me, kind of in the rotation at quarterback. But then in my sophomore year, I had the opportunity to start, and I had a lot of early success. A few games into the year, I broke a county record for yards passing in a game. And so that really started to shape my identity. And I had such a passion for football. It was like, this is it, here's what I've been looking for, right? I didn't have any identity established with Christ at that point in my life. And I was really just kind of feeling things out and seeing what stuck. And it was like, football was it. And it, I felt such a peace with it. There was something about the game that I really enjoyed when that first snap was taken. It was like you were out there and you could totally lose yourself in it. And that was just such a beautiful thing to me. For the next 2-3 hours, you didn't worry about anything. You just moved and reacted. And, that's kind of how it came about. Like in that game where I broke the county record, I was just having fun. It was natural. It was easy. It was just who I was meant to be, right? I was kind of in the zone. As time went on, I started getting some interest from higher level programs, and it became my desire to play at the top echelon of college football, so I wanted nothing less than a Division I full ride scholarship. And early on, it looked like that might be a realistic goal, because I was getting interest from some of these programs. I probably had letters from 18 or 20 Division I programs. In my junior year, I went and did visits at different places, was invited to Boston College for a game, and went to Pitt to meet with their coaching staff, and was part of a invitation only quarterback camp at Purdue, which was like the top 100 quarterbacks in the country that they were trying to bring into their camp. And it was at the time when Drew Brees was there, and it was all a craze. So it was the place to be if you wanted to be like a passing quarterback. So I had that opportunity. I went to Miami. I went to a number of different places. And ultimately, as it got closer to my senior year, I started to feel a lot of the pressure associated with, playing at this elite level, and also performing in such a way that I could continue to garner the attention of these big time, heavy hitting programs, because nobody was offering me. I was getting interest, and it was really a lot heavier kind of in my sophomore and junior years. And then as like my senior year approached and there's no scholarship offer, I started to realize like, okay, they're pulling back a little bit. And a lot of people would have said that it had much to do with my height because I was barely 6 feet tall. And at that time, you know, they were looking for the 6'4", 6'5", prototypical, pro style quarterback. I wasn't it. I didn't fit that mold. When I was younger, they may have looked at me and said, well, he might grow. Well, I kind of topped out, and so they started to pull back. And that really damaged my psyche, because now I'm like wondering, is this goal even realistic? It felt like it was just slipping through my hands. I had it, and now here it goes so quickly. I started really becoming obsessed, like that obsessive compulsive piece of my brain that was wired in there that wanted to be in control started taking over my performance athletically, where it was, like I could throw a completion 25, 30 yards down the field, but if it wasn't a beautiful, tight spiral hitting the guy right in the chest, I would critique myself, to the point where it would drive me crazy. And every throw my senior year became about that, about being perfect. And so I started to really be overcome by the anxiety of all of that. And by the time my senior year ended, I didn't really want anything more to do with football. I remember crying on the field at the end of our last game, and I walked up to my best friend, and it had just been such a grind of a season. He was out there with me the whole time, and I looked at him and I said, it's over. And, we just kind of stood on the field and shared a tear together, and it felt like that was it. And then a few months passed, and I decided, like, you know what, I'm going to get back in the saddle. I'm going to give this another go. Okay. I had interest. I could have played at a bunch of Division II, Division III, even FCS or 1AA schools. But again, I was like all or nothing, Division I, full scholarship offer or bust. And so a few months after the season, I kind of reevaluated things, and I thought, all right, I'm going to go play junior college football out in Southern California. It's the hotbed of junior college football, where a lot of guys get opportunities to play at a Division I level through a transfer process. So I looked at that as like, maybe that's the route to go. I think in the back of my head, I was also trying to escape. There was kind of a lot of confining elements to like the small town that I grew up in, and I just wanted to get away. I was kind of running, and so Southern California was an attractive place. Like, I went out there to visit, and I fell in love, like, who doesn't want to live in Huntington Beach, California, and to have access to all the beautiful amenities out there is incredible. So I go out, and, we're into training camp, and I'm just like, I'm struggling, now I'm throwing to receivers that have speed that I was not acclimated to yet. And so I've got to judge, the timing a whole lot different. And I'm missing on my throws, and like the demon that was kind of poking at me my entire senior season, now it's back, and it's like more persistent, because now it's like higher pressure. Like, they expect you to excel. What is going on here? So I quit. And, I just enjoyed my life in Southern California for a year. And I was still a good student at that point in time. I was still excelling. I made a commitment to the academics because I really felt like I had let my family down in leaving football, because they had supported me in going out there and, financially getting me set up in a studio apartment, because we didn't have on-campus housing at the junior college. So they had put a lot into me making that commitment. And then for me to quit, it was a real gut punch. So I committed to the fact that I'm going to succeed on the academic front, and I'm going to get myself in a position to, finish out a 4-year degree someplace else where, an academic institution that's got a great reputation. I was looking at the time at places like UCLA and and Berkeley and things like that. Because they kind of had a fast track process to get you into those schools if you desired it. But it was the summer before my sophomore year of college, and I was out there again, having a lot of fun. And I had a friend come to visit from Pennsylvania, one of my best friends from back home, and we were bored one night and didn't really have any plans. I kind of had something lined up for every night, that he was out there, except this particular one. And we talked about, smoking some weed, right? I didn't have like a guy. That wasn't really even something I did a lot in California, though it had been kind of something that I had exposed myself to in high school. And, my network of friends there, like our senior year of high school, we did a lot of drinking and smoking weed. But now in California, like that wasn't a big part of me. So we actually, this is in the time of AOL and Instant Messenger and things. So we go scouting the internet for a source. And my buddy finds someone and they agree to meet us, maybe 2 miles away, something like that, over by the college, actually, in like a Kinko's parking lot, I remember. We go over there, and I should have known when this individual stepped out of the car that whatever they had was some pretty high-test stuff, because you could just tell. So we bring it home, and, he and I are kind of just sitting in my apartment. We roll a joint, we smoke it. And then me, who always liked to kind of push the limits of things, I say, well, let's do another one. So we do another one. After that, I was hit with such an incredible wave of paranoia that, I was pacing back and forth throughout the apartment. I felt like I was crawling out of my skin. There was no calming down. I felt like I was losing my mind, essentially. And I remember trying to go to bed that night, and it just felt like I was falling. If I laid down, it felt like I was falling through the floor. And I was just so worked up, and it was triggering all this anxiety that I had been burying for years, trying to conceal it through like the athletics journey and, all the identity crisis that I was going through with obsessive compulsive disorder and things. Now it was like this door had been opened through the drug where everything that was inside could just come running out like a flood. And so that's what happened. I woke up the next day and it was like I could not turn the high off. I didn't know at that point that the high that I was really experiencing was a lot of this adrenaline and fear and stuff that had just, started to permeate my entire being. And from there, things got pretty rough pretty quick. I started experiencing anxiety and panic. And to back this up real quick, I should also share, I learned later that this wasn't your typical marijuana. This had been laced with what they call angel dust. And so that wasn't anything I ever dabbled in before, nor was it something, had I known, that I would have experimented with. But that night, kind of being silly, taking a risk, I got myself in trouble, and I opened a door that I couldn't close. And so in the days ahead, my buddy goes home, and now I'm alone in California and kind of the isolation of this one bedroom. It's not even a one bedroom. It's a studio apartment. And I'm wrestling with this demon. I don't even know what anxiety is at this point. So I start like doing some research, and ultimately I come to the conclusion that this is anxiety that I'm feeling. And it does give me some comfort that there's some kind of explanation for what's going on inside of me physically and what's tormenting my mind. But I'll be honest, I'm a wreck. I started experiencing panic at just an absolutely extreme level. And I was so far away from home too. Like all of my known comforts, my mom and my dad, like, they weren't there. I didn't have access to them. I had a girlfriend at that time, a pretty serious girlfriend in California, and she was just a beautiful person. And she was there to support me, but it was beyond what she could handle. And so ultimately, this anxiety and panic just gets to the point where, it's dominating my life. I'm experiencing things that really like disassociation. I would be driving to campus, to get there for a class or whatever that I had scheduled that day. And I would start feeling as though I was floating like outside of my body. And I'd start asking these weird questions like, who am I and where am I? And like, it was like I was detaching from myself. That's how extreme the anxiety was, is that it had pushed me to that point of dissociation. And so I had to do something. I ended up coming back to Pennsylvania so I finished one last semester there, which was the first semester of my sophomore year. And then I moved home and kind of got my bearings and responded pretty quickly once I was in kind of a comforting, nurturing environment. And then I transferred about a semester later. I transferred to the University of North Carolina to finish my degree. And from there, things improved. Like, I still had this demon that I was wrestling with, this anxiety and panic disorder, but I had gotten it a bit better under control. I was trying to do it all in my own strength, though. And there would come a point in time later in my life when I wouldn't be able to do that. But in that season, it was like I became obsessed with, working out, right? And not working out just like pumping iron or something like that, but I like to run. And that actually all started on a day when I was feeling vulnerable. And the thoughts, the persistent negative thoughts were starting to cycle in my mind again. And I was just like, I got to do something about this, because I know this is a slippery slope. And if I don't, go on the offensive, like, this is going to take over. I can feel the anxiety starting to build. So that particular day, I said, all right, I'm worried about what this is going to do to me. I'm having these paranoias about my health and my mind and things of that nature. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and run. And if it doesn't kill me, I'll know that this isn't as bad as like I'm perceiving, and we'll get things back on track. So I went for a run. The oxytocin or whatever is kicking at that point, and I'm feeling a lot better. And it's like, oh, okay, I got some control back. So what do? I look for more control. I keep running. And it's like, now I start getting into this obsession of running, where it's like, I can't stop. Not one day. I ran for 165 days straight through, bad weather, good weather, like through having to travel home, whatever. I found places to get it done. 165 days in a row. Lost all kinds of weight. Kind of looked like a shell of my former self, but I felt good. I slept well at night for a while. And anyway, so that's kind of the thing where in my past, I always thought that I could manage a lot of things like in my own will, in my own strength. And that was kind of the solution that I applied throughout my life as an adult as I moved forward until I broke. And that breaking point actually came in my late 20s. I was just about to turn 30 years old. And I was in a season, and we'll back it up real quick. So I'll tell you this too. When I got out of college, I started actually wrestling with another demon. I had a girlfriend then at the University of North Carolina, and she and I became pretty serious. We moved after graduating. We moved up to the Philadelphia area, and we both, lived together and worked up there, and we ended up getting engaged. And it was the first time in my life when I allowed myself to be put into debt. that was a demon that tormented me as well and played into a lot of the anxiety that started to transpire in the years ahead. So I wanted to mention that. The debt came from me financing her engagement ring. I was like a few months into my first job out of college. I had nothing really in savings, and I consulted with my father about it, and he kind of thought like this is an opportunity for you to kind of learn financial responsibility. And so, you're just going to have to, you can finance it and pay it off over time. Like you'll be committed to it and you'll take care of it and whatever. So hurry the process. I go get a ring and I put thousands and thousands of dollars of debt on a credit card. I had no idea how devastating that decision would be, because from an obsessive compulsive perspective, it was wreaking havoc on my mind. I could not remove the idea of debt from my brain. I wanted it gone. It just tormented me. Like if I knew it was sitting out there, I couldn't handle it, So I started looking for quick fixes. I wasn't making enough money in my job to pay it off quickly. In fact, I was like, how am I even going to make beyond like the minimum payment? This is going to take forever. So my solution was to go gamble, right? You need more money, so let's go gamble what you've got. Horrible, horrible idea. At that time, there were online sports books and online casinos popping up. And so it was easy access. It started with just sports betting, and then it was like, it's not fast enough money. I got to put $50 on a game or something and wait 3 hours for the outcome. Just doesn't stack up quick enough, but here's a blackjack table. Here's an opportunity to accelerate things. So I started dabbling there in the casinos, and it was really dangerous. What ended up happening was I built a bigger mountain of debt because I used credit cards and things to fund that habit. And what started as like one big expense that I was going to have to pay off over time, now I'm starting to have to pay off this mountain that I'm accumulating because of a gambling habit, which was all really established because I could not handle the thought of carrying my debt around. Now I'm like into the throes of addiction. Now it's at the point actually where I started like, this is a means to an end, but then there were times where I would have big wins where it would pay off a significant portion of anything I owed anyone, or even all of it, and then some. But then it became about like, whoa, how far could you get ahead? And so I walked away from big pots at times. I mean, there was one point in my life where I had like $43,000 in an online casino, and I continued to play until I lost it all. They actually gave me, I think, $1,800 or $2,000 in like rewards, like free money after that because of the amount that I bet during that time. This is crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. So moving forward to this breaking point, I'm like 29 years old. I'm coming out of another relationship because that engagement did not work out, and for good reason. I don't think that we were right for each other. But beyond that, all of the things that I had going on, while I'm trying to mask it and give people the perception that I've got everything under control, I'm working a good job. At that point in my life, I'm like driving a Lexus, like I'm making money in sales, whatever. Underneath it all, like I'm a train wreck. My finances are a wreck. I'm dealing with tons of anxiety. I'm still a control freak, so that's putting a lot of strain and pressure on my relationships. Like I'm a mess. And it wasn't just her. There was another significant relationship that left. And then fast forward to the, year when I kind of have my breakdown. I'm coming out, and this is a girlfriend, but I'm coming out of a breakup there, and it's kind of an ugly one. And I'm dealing with a lot of anxiety at the tail end of it as I'm trying to really, and that one was one where it was like, you knew the whole time that you weren't a good fit for each other, but you tried to, fit it together. And I think like the strain of attempting to do that was really starting to build my anxiety back up again. It was the Super Bowl of 2011. So it's like February 2011. She and I are at a party together, and on the way back, we get into an argument. And she gets pretty emotional, and it starts triggering like my anxieties, and I'm driving the car. And so for the first time in a while, I start to feel like a panic attack coming on. And I'm like, whoa, I'm driving, like this isn't the place to have a panic attack. I try and just kind of breathe through it. And then ultimately I have to pull off to the side of the road. And what overcame me in that moment was something so extreme. It was nothing like I had ever experienced before. And I had some really, really intense, horrible panic attacks, but this was next level. This was like a full-on nervous breakdown. I pulled over into the parking lot of this furniture store. And I got out of the car and I just tried to walk, and I could barely like put a foot in front of the other. I couldn't breathe. My mind felt like it was going to a place of like no return. And I started shaking almost as like though I was having a seizure, just shaking. Could not put a sentence together, could not get a word out. And this went on and on and on for like what seemed like forever. It was probably like 30 minutes or something. I don't know exactly. Time escaped me in that moment. And she just kind of waited until it passed. And then eventually, and I wasn't in good shape, but I was good enough to get another 5 or 10 miles down the road and get us home. I got back into the car. I drove home. We split in the days ahead. And I tried to start getting my life back in order. The problem is that, again, this door had been opened and anxiety was about to rip through my life like a flood. And it was going to come in a way that I had never experienced it before. And I thought things were bad, when I was, say, 19 years old in California in isolation out there. Now I'm actually like back in Pennsylvania. I'm kind of close to my family. So I've got familiar surroundings and things of that nature, but it didn't matter. What was coming was so intense. I just, I look at it now and it actually just, it shakes me up inside to even tell the story. So this nervous breakdown experience really kind of plants this seed that this could happen at any point in time. And I'm dreadfully, fearful of being out in public and having this occur, because it's like everybody's going to see what's going on with me and they're going to like throw me into a psych ward and, with the padded walls, and I'm never going to get out. Right. Like this is like my future, or either that or I'm going to die, so I can't allow this to happen again. So I start like protecting myself. And what happens is I kind of slowly become a slave to my comfort zone, and I get comfortable in isolation. Like that's the only place I'm comfortable, because if I go out in public, like there's this threat that this could happen again. I could have another nervous breakdown when I'm standing in the line at the grocery store, when I'm waiting at the drive-thru at McDonald's for a cup of coffee or whatever. Like this could happen anywhere. So it's better just to stay put. So I'm in this 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment, and I'm just hanging out by myself. And over like the next 6 months, I shut everybody out and I stopped doing the things that I normally do. In fact, there were periods of time where I wouldn't leave my apartment for like 2 weeks. And it became a struggle for me to even, leave my apartment for the sake of going and getting my mail or taking the trash out. Everything became a monumental obstacle. And my body would actually react when I tried to push that limit. I would just get these shots of adrenaline that would send me through the roof. At this point in my life, it's like I'm on a 24/7 adrenaline drip, and it's driving me crazy. Like I'm not sleeping at night. When I go to bed, I'm fearful because throughout the night I may have 4 or 5 panic attacks. And in those situations, I'm like thrown from the bed. I wind up on the floor. I think that I'm dying. I piece myself together. I try and gather my surroundings, get back into bed, but I'm afraid to close my eyes because I'm just waiting for it to occur again. And so there were a lot of nights where, I would wait until the sun came up because I was essentially afraid of the dark at that point. I was afraid of going to sleep because there was no rest. And then I'd, get up on a couple hours of rest, possibly, and try and do my work for the day. Thankfully, I had a job where I was remote at that point in time, and I was able to kind of conceal a lot of it. But I was really, really struggling. So in this season, I'm still, kind of dipping into my escape outlet, which was gambling in that online casino sports wagering realm. And I'm just, piling on more stress and anxiety, of course, because it's just amassing more debt. And it's just, it's a horrible demon that I can't shake. But it was like this outlet for me where I could escape like the chaos of my mind for a short period of time and feel like a little bit of distraction and peace. It's like what a lot of people do with, drugs or alcohol. It's like, I got to get away from this. I can't handle what's going on. So I'm going to run to this vice and it's going to give me a bit of peace. And you're not really thinking about, what happens when it wears off. You're just trying to get through the moment. And so one day it's the summer. There's absolutely nothing sports related on TV that I can bet on, and like lose myself in for a few hours, other than there's a women's soccer match. And we're not even talking like women's World Cup. This was just, like an exhibition match or something. It's not even like, I know nothing about either of the teams, but I'm like, all right, well, it's televised, so I can flip it on the TV screen. I can watch a little bit of it and I'll put a bet on it. And I put a significant wager on something I had no idea about. And, the match is going and I'm seeing that this isn't going to work out in my favor. And so I start to get frustrated and I go over to my computer and I start dabbling in the online casino. I'm losing there and I just slap the screen of my laptop, shatter it. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I've cut off my lifeline. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with my mind now? Like, I don't have the opportunity to bet anymore. So I'm at this stage in my life where I don't want to leave my apartment. That's a major, major wrestling match. Like, I don't go out to do anything. But I realize I have to if I'm going to resolve this situation because I need a new laptop. So there's a Best Buy just a couple of miles from my apartment. And I'm like, well, if I can get there, I can get a new laptop. I can get home. Within a few hours, I can be back in the casino. I can make myself feel better because I can win some money back or whatever. So I get myself dressed and I force myself out. And as I'm walking through this Best Buy, I'm shaking because I know what I'm doing is wrong. Like there is like, I get it. I see kind of how desperate I am. I am like a full-blown addict at this point who's buried under mounds of anxiety. I mean, I can't imagine what people saw as they passed me in the store. I walk up to the checkout and I pay for this thing. And then I head out into the parking lot. And as I'm walking in my car, a man comes up to me out of nowhere. I mean, like he was led to me on a sprint almost. He is just directly, from a different part of the lot. He comes barreling right over in front of me and says, "Do I look like a blank to you?" And I'm like, "What? What do you mean? Do I look like a blank to you?" I said, What are you talking about, man? Like, Do I look like a blank to you? And so I'm like, whoa, buddy, like, chill out, like I step away from him. I'm shaking. I get into my car and I realize that the blank, the term that he used, was a term that I had just used in my apartment in the kind of isolation of my apartment where I thought nobody could see or hear. I had yelled that term out loud in my frustration at the outcome of the match that I was watching unfold on TV, where the bet was going in the wrong direction. And this wasn't like the common word. It was a nasty word. But it's not one that anybody would just like picked out of the air. So I'm sitting in my car, realizing what happened, and I'm like, whoa. Wave of the craziest conviction washes over me. God was revealing to me in that moment my brokenness. And he was using that man to get my attention and to show me what I had become. It was undeniable. I mean, it was a divine intervention. I felt totally lost and totally sick. Like, how could I have become this person? This isn't me. Like, I was a good guy. I cared about people. Like, I didn't treat people like that. Like, that's not the way that, I mean, yeah, I was a wreck. I made a bunch of bad decisions, but I didn't talk like that about people. I went home and proceeded to clean out everything in my gambling account. Basically gambled the last of what was in there. And then knew I was done. I emptied it out and I was done. And after that, it was really the last bet I ever made outside of like, there was a trip to Vegas or something many years later, but never gambled again. Turned it all over. I got into the shower and as I was standing there under the shower head and the water's just like pouring over me, which by the way is always a very like therapeutic and spiritual thing for me. I have like all kinds of breakthroughs and clarity and peace and revelation and in prayer in the shower. But at this point, I don't really know what prayer is. But the wave of conviction that had hit me not long earlier, an hour or two earlier, and now I'm standing in the shower, it's hitting me there too. And so I'm hearing God speak to me and say, what is the common thing in all of this? You've pointed the finger at virtually everyone. The failed relationships, the financial trouble and stress, like the brokenness, like in your family or what is the one common theme? And I knew right away it was me. I was always present. I was always an active participant. Had there been things done to me that were possibly wrong? Yeah, but I was there. I put myself in those situations. I chose to be there. I had some bad breaks, sure, but I participated. I set myself in those circumstances where things, could derail. And it was time for me to stop blaming. And I knew in that moment that God was telling me, like, take responsibility for your life. Own it. Tell your story, seek forgiveness, and let's move forward. That night, I went and purchased a domain on WordPress, setback2comeback.com. The very next day, it was July 15th of 2011, I started sharing my story for the first time. Very transparently. Eased into it maybe that first post or two, and then went really raw into all of this mental health journey that I had been concealing, and I revealed it all. And the inspiration behind it was to make right with God, because I knew that it was him in that parking lot. I knew that it was him in that shower where it was like, I'm going to get your attention. It's going to be undeniable. And I need you to make it right. And so I was seeking forgiveness and reconciliation with him first. And then I was like, okay, I'm not worried then about anything else. Like, that's it. If I'm right with God, then I have nothing to fear otherwise. And I wanted to make right with some of the people that I had hurt, along the way in my journey. So I started telling the story, having no idea what would be revealed through that process, like the confession, the testimony. I didn't know what a testimony was at that point because I didn't really know God other than this intervention moment. I start sharing, and it's crazy. It's kind of like painful. I sit at the computer and I'd shake as I would type. And by the end of it, I just felt such a release, but my anxiety didn't go away. It persisted. I would just keep going deeper and deeper. And then I started dabbling a little bit with my faith in the process, because God was starting to reveal himself to me. Like there was conviction that was pouring over me about certain elements of my story. And then I wanted to understand that better. I wanted to repent. And I started engaging with, I'll tell you this, my father, who never gave up on me and was my best support and friend through all of the craziness that I went through from a mental health perspective. He started showing up and giving me a little bit of a nudge down the path of my faith. He would share a fresh copy of the Bible, or he'd introduce me to a devotional series, and I would start dabbling. He didn't force it, just kind of like a gentle nudge, like, here's something to take a look at if you have time. And in those moments, like in isolation, when I started to feel desperate, I would start leafing through the Bible. And what was crazy was God would start moving in it. Like the words, I at that point in my life, I always thought it was so wild. Like I'd kind of play this game where I'd leaf through and just stop my finger at a page and open it and just say, like, what are you going to say to me today, God? And then like these words would jump off the page and I'd be like, oh my goodness, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And that's how a lot of the devotional series kind of played out too. I started experimenting with the Bible app on my phone, and I'd get into a series, and it may be a 365-day series, but the message for that day was always like spot on with what I was wrestling with. And there were times where it was like, it almost creeped me out. Like, how does he know this? How does he know that I need this message today? This is incredible. Like, he is undeniable. Like, he's here. That said, I was still trying to recover from what I was going through in my own strength. I was still agoraphobic. I was still ridden with anxiety and panic, still struggling to sleep at night. And this went on as I continued to share my story and reveal all of these, kind of gory details of my mental health journey. I'm still wrestling. Like, and I got to the point where, I started writing in July, and by the fall of that year, I'm like, this isn't going away. Like, and I was probably still trying in, my own intuition to come up with solutions. And I was running out because everything I tried, like in my early 20s, having recovered from the devastating season of my life in California and then going to the University of North Carolina, and I get involved with fitness, and it's like, okay, well, I'll run 165 days straight, and then I'll take back control. I'll monitor my diet. I'll do everything right, and I'll be able to dispel this demon. At earlier stages in my life, I could keep things at bay using those kinds of strategies, but it was clear to me in this season that was not going to work. And so everything that I tried in my own strength things that worked for me previously, it was like one by one, he was revealing to me, that's not going to be it. That's not going to be the solution. Not going to happen this time. Sorry. Continuing to lead me to a point of more complete and utter reliance on him. It was Thanksgiving 2011. I made the determination that I couldn't go to our family Thanksgiving. Now, my immediate family, my mom, dad, sister, they're about 30 minutes away from where I'm living. My extended family, where we would gather over the holidays, was, maybe an hour and a half, something like that. I wasn't going to go. Couldn't risk that. Here again, I'm the guy that abandons the shopping cart in the grocery store because he can't stand in line for 5 minutes. I can't get in the car and go 30 minutes. I certainly can't go an hour and a half. I'm a wreck. So I call them and I tell them I'm not going to be able to make it. I think it breaks their hearts. It breaks their hearts for me because they're looking at me like, what of a sad state of affairs. He's going to sit alone on Thanksgiving, which I did. And it was a very humbling thing because I remember I also didn't have any food in my apartment at that time. The pantry was bare. I remember looking in my fridge on Thanksgiving Day and there was one piece of fruit. It was a pear. Later that evening, my family actually came down and dropped off some food for me. But during the day, it was just wow, the emptiness that I felt sitting there and, flipping on the Macy's parade or whatever and the football game. It's this is rough. How far have I fallen? A few days later, I got to the point where I was broke. I had nothing left. And I remember I was walking from the living room space to my bedroom. And, that was just a place of absolute torment for me every night. And I remember kind of feeling like I can't face this again. And so I fell to my knees. And I said, God, I'm not going to take my life because I know enough about you at this point where that's not my desire. I'm not going to quit. I'm not going out that way. But if you're ready for me, I'm ready to go. Take me now. Or if you desire me to be here, I'm out of options, for how to right this ship. So if you desire me, I need you to take my life and do with it according to your will. I surrendered. And in that moment, God gave me 5 words. Let go, trust, believe, faith. I was so excited that he had spoken that to me that I ran to my computer. I opened up an empty Word document and I made big, bold letters, typed out those words, printed it, taped it to my refrigerator. And for the next several months, I walked in step with those words. As I approached the doorway, it was let go, trust, believe, faith. It was literally like the great Martin Luther King said, you don't need to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step in faith. And that's what I did. Day after day, God walked with me and nudged me forward in faith. I started to let go, to hand things over to him, and he began to redeem my life. I was in a rough place, where physically I felt like I was on the brink of a heart attack every day. He renewed my health. I started jogging in place in my apartment. Eventually, he led me down to the exercise room in my apartment community. And I'd get on the treadmill and I'd feel his hand on my back. I just envisioned that, the Lord Jesus Christ was standing behind me with his hand on my back. And I'd get going and I'd make it 10 or 15 minutes. And then I'd extend it to 30 or whatever. And so my health started to improve. And that gave me hope as well. I started going deeper into my studies of the Word and got into devotional series that really kind of spoke to what I had been through. And about, maybe 3 months after I surrendered my life, I met the woman who would become my wife. Miraculously, through a dating app that I had actually canceled my subscription to. She reached out to me, and my email nudged me saying, like, hey, this person has tried to contact you. You should re-engage. I signed back up for a month just so I could communicate with her. And little did I know that that woman would become my wife. And God placed her in my life at a time when I was finally ready to receive a real relationship, because I understood my new identity in Christ and what my foundation was. I had given up the vice that had, held me captive with gambling. I had surrendered my life and my anxieties and things to him, and he had begun redeeming me. And so she comes into my life, and she's a piece of that recovery story as well, because her presence encourages me to take steps. Like, I wasn't real comfortable with going out and having dinner somewhere, but because she was there, I could make that move. What's crazy is a few months into our relationship, we wound up taking a trip because there was such a boldness and a courage that had come into my life in faith that I wanted to kind of stretch it and test, what can't God do? So we got on a plane and we went across the country to California. And I think it was the first week of July in 2012. So I was not far removed from agoraphobia at that point when I went all the way across the country, really to revisit a place where my journey with anxiety and panic disorder and stuff had started, many years prior. So God is good. God is faithful. God has done miraculous things in my life, and the journey that I've been on since that time, and I think it's time to break, I will reveal in part 2. And then I will give you kind of an overview of how we got to this point with Discipled. You got to hear kind of the front end of my story. And now, after this born again transformation, I start down a path where really my sole focus and my identity in life becomes rooted in serving. I'm not perfect. There's a lot of maturing and molding that needs to continue to happen over the course of like the next decade to get us to the point where we're at here. And I'll reveal some of that on the next episode. But it's amazing to think back to where I was and where he's led me to at this point today. To be able to sit here and have this conversation with you very openly, very transparently, and to lead a group of other men who are doing the same. It's such a blessing, such a privilege. And I want you to know that there are some really beautiful things coming in the second part of this episode as we get into trust, believe, and faith. I had started to let go 2011, 2012, but I was still learning how to trust, believe, and live in faith. Hope that you'll join me for part 2. Looking forward to reconnecting with you soon. God bless.